So now I wanted to talk a little bit about light. You can see where we have a very, very obvious light source. We have a highlight here, we have a shadow area, and we have midtones in between. An actual object in space is going to have at the very least two light sources, assuming it's not the only object in the frame. It's going to have the direct light source. In this case, we have an imaginary light source somewhere up and to his right, and probably to his front, casting the shadow a little bit backwards. And also, that light is not just going to be illuminating that one form, but it's going to be illuminating everything in the picture. So we're going to be carrying that light source down here, of course. And what that is going to do, however, is light will reflect off of other objects. So although this side of the face is in shadow, it's going to pick up reflected light from other objects. It's going to pick up a little bit of this purple. It's going to pick up a little bit of this yellow. And so what we want to do in order to make it look like it's all one piece is we're going to have to put a little bit of that yellow light and a little bit of that purple light into that skin. And if we don't, it's going to look extremely artificial. So what I'm going to do is, because I might want to eventually change the color of this tunic, I don't want to paint that yellow directly on that skin. And it's going to be very subtle too. I might go back and add what's called a rim light in a later illustration, but that would be, say, from a secondary light source. Right now we're just doing reflected light. So I'm going to create a layer above all other layers, and oops, created two layers. Have a double click problem going on today, and I'm going to call this reflected light. And sometimes if it's a small area and I'm pretty sure about the colors that are going to be reflecting, I might actually work on the skin layer. But I'm going to work on the reflected layer for right now because I'm not sure exactly what I want to do. And let's go to our brush, and we're going to use a very soft brush. And we're going to use a very large brush because this light is going to be a very soft and indistinct light. It's just scattered light from other objects in the frame. And the first thing I want to do is I don't want to be, well, let's pick up that color as the first thing. So let's pick up the color of this tunic. I don't want to paint it everywhere. I don't want to paint it out here because there's nothing for that light to reflect on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain my painting area to where the skin is. And the easiest way to do that is to go down here to the skin layer. And if I command or control on a PC, if I command click on that skin layer, I have loaded see the little marching ants here, I've loaded a selection just around that area. So I can only paint inside that area, but I don't have to be on the skin layer to do it. I can go up here to this reflected light layer, and let's go ahead with 100% opacity first. And you can see that I can only paint over the skin. And again, this is a separate layer. Nothing I do on that layer affects anything below it. And I'm going to work with a much, much, much reduced opacity and a much larger brush. So I'm going to switch to my brush tool. I will go with a 65 pixel, sounds good. And I'm going to pick up this yellow, and pick up a light yellow. And I'm going to work in the shadow areas here. And I've got about a 5% opacity here. And I think that's what I'm going to stay with for the moment. And I'm just going to start painting some very subtle color into, in this case, the shadow areas, since they're the areas that point downward. And we don't want to get anything too abrupt or too noticeable. And it's just going to be a very little bit of yellow that is reflected off the tunic, and we'll want to do the same thing with the purple here. And we'll work that into the shadows, and it's particularly on this edge here, I think, where we're kind of disappearing into the purple, and right along the edge where the purple meets the flesh, because that's going to be very close. We're going to get a direct reflection. Maybe just a little bit in some of the shadow areas up there. Too much. Still too much. There we go. Very subtle. And we're going to want to do a little bit over here, And we're going to want to pick up that yellow over here where we're getting some reflection. And we're going to add some shadow in here eventually, but that's not part of this tutorial. So let's pick up a little bit on this very, very understated Adam's apple. And a little bit there. A little bit around there. And then finally on this under the chin, we're probably going to want a little bit more color simply because it'll give it some visual interest, and it's a downward area which is only getting light, only getting reflected light. So we're going to want to mix that purple and that yellow together a little bit, and we might even blend them. So I'm going to get my blend tool, make it large, and kind of blend that together. All right. So let's get a good view of it. This is the face with the reflected light, and this is the face without the reflected light. Let's get a little bit farther away. It's very subtle, but it really does make the face look like it is part of the image. And particularly when we have all of this rendered, all of the tunic and all of the robe rendered, it will really make a tremendous difference in making your figure look naturalistic. Like I said, this is pretty much standard painting technique, paying attention to how light works. The reason I bring it up here is that I'm using some digital techniques, for instance, putting it on a separate layer so that it can be changed in the future. I can change that color without necessarily disturbing what's underneath. If I want to change this yellow to a blue later on, I might be able to work changing some of these yellow hues to purple or to blue, or I might decide to scrap it all together, but I won't have to scrap the entire face or do a lot of rework on the face. So that's our lesson for this time. Next time when we come back, I think we'll be working on those spooky, spooky eyes.